Last week, we drove the all-new Maruti Suzuki Grand Vitara, and we drove it here in India. In fact, we drove all three powertrain options from your smart hybrid manual with all-wheel drive, smart hybrid with automatic, and of course, the strong hybrid. And we're going to tell you all about how the car felt. The only thing is that we drove the car at Maruti's R&D facility at Rohtak. They have 33 test tracks and about 250 labs. We were only allowed to use 3 test tracks. We drove it on the high-speed oval, we drove it on the city circuit, and of course the highway circuit. So we're going to tell you what the Grand Vitara feels like in the flesh, outside, in light, in terms of road presence, in terms of how it feels on the inside when you're sitting, and of course the driving. The differences between the manual, the automatic, and of course the strong hybrid. Now the only catch here is that since we were at the R&D facility, we were not allowed to carry any of our belongings, including cell phones or any camera equipment, so we don't really have any footage of us driving it there. But in fact, Maruti's just given us a few pictures and we're going to roll them as part of this video because I'm sure you want to see some bit of the car just instead of just looking at my face through the course of this video. What we're also going to do is we're going to use some of the footage that we shot during the unveil of the car, so you have a break instead of just a monotonous monologue from my end. But there will be something for you to take away from the video because we did spend half a day driving the car. Now we'll split this video into 3 parts. First, we'll tell you what the Grand Vitara looks and feels like in the real world from the outside and inside. We'll tell you how the 3 drivetrains work in the real world, of course, and we'll tell you what the ride and handling characteristic of the Grand Vitara is like. So let's get started. Now, the Grand Vitara's design is quite a departure from what we've seen Maruti Suzuki put out in so many years. And it resembles what we're seeing from MG, from Tata Motors, and even Hyundai, where you've got these tiny eyebrows right up top and the main headlamps in the bumper lower down. What this does is it gives the car a buff front end and there are no sharp edges. So this is being done essentially to improve pedestrian safety norms which are in place. So that's where you're seeing the similarity in terms of design. Now, when we saw the car during the unveil under artificial lights and inside a closed place, it didn't stand out as much, but this is a big car. It pretty much belongs in the Creta and Seltos category. You can see it visually. It has decent road presence, unlike, let's say, the Tiguan or the Kushaq, which are similarly priced, but of course they're half a size smaller, if you will. The only thing that didn't strike us as palatable to the eyes is probably the overhangs. It's got really long overhangs at the front and at the back. And honestly, the best angle to view the Vitara from is from the rear 3/4 with those flat tail lamps. It does really stand out. Now, when you step inside, it is very easy to get in and get out of the Grand Vitara. The doors open wide and you really just walk in and walk out. So there is no climbing in like you have in some of the bigger SUVs, and you don't have to slouch down like you have to do in sedans. So it's pretty convenient to get in and get out. And especially at the rear, when you move in, the seat immediately feels accommodating. It feels large, and the seat back angle is adjustable for 2-step. And so even straight up, it's pretty comfortable and it's comfortable seating all around. The only thing is that the seat squab is not very big, but what Maruti's done is it's given plenty of space under the front seat, so you can tuck in your legs and then that way have a little more thigh support. So it is a comfortable place to be in. There is decent shoulder room, lots of knee room. The headroom, especially the versions that we drove, which are top spec versions with the panoramic sunroof, that is where maybe 6-footers might have a challenge because the roof is slightly, the internal dimensions for the roof are slightly less, which probably isn't going to be a problem for lower spec versions without the panoramic sunroof. In terms of quality, it is pretty much at par at what you'd expect in the class. So Creta, Seltos, thereabouts. Design is unique, it's fresh for a Maruti. So overall, it feels like a car that you would wouldn't mind paying rupees 15 to 20 lakhs, in terms of design, in terms of material use, in terms of the color employed, even the stitching on the seat, for instance. So all of this just adds a hint of premiumness to the whole car. The only thing is that there are some matte black plastics that are used, which look cheap. And when I say cheap, they look downright cheap, which as if they don't belong in that car, and that's a big miss from Maruti. And the operability of some buttons, they just don't have that sort of well-engineered feedback that you'd like. But otherwise, overall, I think it's a cabin that, in terms of feeling of space, comfort, all of that, I think it checks more boxes than it doesn't. So that's a good step for Maruti with the Grand Vitara. Now let's talk about the engines, and let's start with the Smart Hybrid manual. A Smart Hybrid is the same engine that you get on the Brezza, so it's a 1.5 litre 4-cylinder naturally aspirated engine. This is the K15C, an upgrade from what they earlier had, which was the K15B. They've made some changes to the internals, and of course it's more fuel efficient because that's what Maruti does well. And of course there is a good mid-range torque, or better mid-range torque to be had. Now the manual gearbox, the clutch is light, and the amount of travel again is well judged. So it's easy to use the manual gearbox. The only thing that we found with the manual slightly challenging is when you try to go up an incline, the feel of the bite point where the clutch is slightly difficult to find, because with this engine you need to rev it a bit when you're leaving the clutch if you want to take on steeper inclines. So if you're in the hilly areas, or if you're trying to get off a steep climb, that's something that you might want to keep in mind. But otherwise, it's easy to drive, easy to use engine. And this manual you can also have with AllGrip or Maruti's all-wheel drive system. This is not the hardcore all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive system that the Jimny will get when it comes here. This is primarily front-wheel drive, and when the computer detects that there is slip on the front wheels, it shifts power or torque to the rear wheels. So when you take a peek under the car, you can see a thin propeller shaft and a diff at the back. It's all nothing hardcore, nothing heavy duty, just very simple thing. It's also they've tried to have a balance between fuel efficiency and of course all-wheel or all-weather driving conditions. It's not a serious off-roader, so that's out of the question. Next up, of course, the same engine with the 6-speed torque converter. No all-wheel drive option available on the automatic. And compared to the manual, or after driving the manual, of course, it feels I think lethargic might not be the right word, but yeah, it feels slower still than the manual. And you're looking at maybe 0 to 100 time of 14 seconds. So not very fast. And it's, again, like the manual, it's great for the city. The shifts are seamless. You can't really feel it. And if you drive it with the light throttle, if you're not in a hurry, this automatic works. But if you try to drive it with some enthusiasm, then you'll find it wanting, because the engine will get louder as the revs go up, but there isn't a lot of purchase that's gonna, pull you along or take you along. And then of course, we've got the hybrid. Now this is the strong hybrid. Again, it uses a 1.5 litre engine, but it's not the same engine. This one's a 3-cylinder engine, and it makes less than 95 horsepower, but there is a motor battery setup, and overall the system produces close to 115 horsepower. So the only thing is, because it runs a eCVT, so when you go for it, it just sits at what is the ideal RPM for it to get the best performance. So it's just that rubber band effect that most people talk about in the CVT, where the revs just stay. So that's going to be there, and the engine does feel loud at higher revs. So again, you will get the turn of pace is there, or turn of speed is there, but it's not an enjoyable experience if you just go hell for leather. Again, like the manual, like the automatic, the hybrid again suits the Grand Vitara's goal of being a good family car instead of being a sporty oriented SUV to drive and live with. And with the hybrid, you also get a full EV mode. So you can drive it up to 30-35 kilometers per hour in complete EV mode. So when you're in the city, you can use that, and you will have a quiet, serene, and of course green experience, because you're not really polluting. Now to get, since there is no plug-in for this battery to charge. It constantly charges when the engine is running. It's got a small motor generator to do that, and then there's a bigger motor generator which then comes in and drives it in all electric mode. And of course there is recuperation when you get on the brakes or get off the throttle, which again charges the battery. So if you drive intelligently, smartly, if you pay attention, there is a lot that you can get in the EV mode, especially when you're driving in the city, not so much on the highway. So overall, I think, I don't know what the prices are going to be, but of course the hybrid is going to be the most expensive. But hybrid is, in my opinion, the drivetrain or powertrain option to choose when it comes to the Grand Vitara, because it suits its character the best, and that's what you would enjoy most in terms of what you're getting, not in terms of driving, but in terms of the ownership experience, fuel efficiency, quiet running, and of course the relaxed character of the Grand Vitara. And now let's tell you what the ride and handling balance is like. As with the drivetrains, the ride and handling balance of the Grand Vitara is also set towards it being a comfortable family car. Now, we drove it inside the R&D center. We did not take it on the roads outside, but in the city circuit, we had some speed breakers, we had some cobbled streets, and it was immediately evident that the suspension in terms of travel, suspension in terms of the spring rates, and especially the damping is so well judged that when you hit the speed breaker, it doesn't jar you. When you're inside the cabin, it doesn't jar the passengers. And then when you're exiting the speed breaker, generally cars tend to, especially when you have SUVs or longer set of cars, they tend to kick the rear. That doesn't happen because it goes up and settles down almost immediately because of the well-judged, let's say, towards slower damping that it runs at the back. And then, of course, we drove this car on the high-speed oval, and there again, it feels planted. Now, we were told not to drive above 120, even though the track is rated at 190. And when we looked down and we found ourselves doing 140 plus, but it didn't feel like, and that just tells you that how the car is set up in terms of when a car is going at 140, but it doesn't feel like even if it's doing 120. So clearly there is that sort of feeling of security, stability that comes in. So that's again something that works in the Grand Vitara's favor. And then when we drove it on the highway track where we had some tight turns, some longer turns, there it became evident that this car doesn't like to be hustled. So the steering, for instance, less than 2.5 locked turns lock to lock, so reasonably quick steering. But in terms of feel and feedback, no, not much there. Again, in terms of returnability, of course it comes back, but it comes back with such a jerk. There is lack of linearity in it, and that would cause some amount of discomfort to people. So you can't just let it go after turning. You just gotta bring it back or hold it a little, which you don't want. It should have come back nice and even. When you put it into a corner, it doesn't like quick direction changes. It feels unsettled that way. But if you load up the springs gently, so you keep loading the car up, then it sets down really well. It doesn't roll all that much. So it feels well settled there, and again, goes well with the fact that when you are with the family, you're not really going to throw the car around. You're just going to drive it peacefully, nicely, and that's where the Grand Vitara fits well. But if you like driving, if you like enthusiastic driving, then of course the Grand Vitara, even in terms of handling dynamics, isn't really there for you. You have better options there. In terms of braking, good feel, good feedback from the smart hybrid. On the hybrid, strong hybrid, however, because of the regeneration, the braking does feel spongy, but I guess you get used to it in some time. And that was the all-new Grand Vitara drive, or first drive impressions from our end, which we did at the R&D facility. Again, apologies for not having footage from there. It wasn't in our hands. But the good thing is that we are going to drive this car in the real world, and we'll have a much more detailed review of this car with our own footage starting early next month. So come back for that. And of course, do comment and tell us if there's something that we've missed out. Maybe we can tell you that by replying to the comments. And if you like the video, please like it, share it, and if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe as well. Thank you for watching.